In this world of fleeting time and shattered expectations, we all face moments where it feels like the years have slipped away, lost in the labyrinth of mistakes, misfortunes, or unmet desires. Dreams that once seemed vivid, full of promise, fade into the mist, leaving behind only echoes of what might have been. Yet, within these very spaces of brokenness, there lies the possibility of renewal. Life often has a way of taking us through moments of great joy, as well as deep pain, and sometimes it feels like the years slip by unnoticed, leaving behind an overwhelming sense of loss. It's in these moments of apparent futility that we are faced with a stark reality that time, once gone, cannot be reclaimed. The dreams we nurtured, the plans we made, the hopes we held on to, all seem to fade into the past like distant memories, and it is easy to feel as though we have lost something precious, something irreplaceable. In the face of such loss, it becomes difficult to see beyond the present moment, for the weight of regret and grief is a heavy burden to carry. The human experience is one marked by inevitable loss. Whether it's the loss of time due to mistakes we've made, the absence of opportunities we once had, or the dreams that slipped through our fingers like sand, it's a reality we all face. But acknowledging loss is not the same as being defeated by it. To acknowledge loss is to recognize the pain, the emptiness, and the longing that come with it, but it is also to allow ourselves the space to reflect and heal. Loss is a part of life, not because it defines us, but because it teaches us, shapes us, and opens our hearts to something deeper than mere success or accomplishment. There is a common notion that time, once lost, cannot be restored. This belief can paralyze us, especially when we are confronted with the consequences of choices we regret. We look at our lives and see the years that seem to have disappeared, the opportunities that seem to have been wasted, and we wonder if we will ever recover. The truth is that loss is a powerful teacher, but only if we allow ourselves to learn from it. It is in these times of loss that we are forced to ask deeper questions about the nature of life, purpose, and restoration. And though it may seem paradoxical, it is in the recognition of our brokenness that we find the possibility of healing. In our society, there is a tendency to measure our worth by accomplishments, by the markers of success that are visible to the world. We often think of time as a currency, something that must be spent wisely, or else it is lost forever. But this view of time as a finite resource is one that does not consider the possibility of transformation. When we focus only on what is lost, we miss the deeper truth that even in the moments of loss, there is the potential for growth. The years that seem wasted can, in fact, become the foundation for something new and greater than what we originally envisioned. Faith, in its deepest sense, is the belief that God can redeem time, restore what was lost, and transform our brokenness into something beautiful. It is the conviction that even when we feel as though we've fallen too far, we are not beyond God's reach. Loss, then, is not a sign of defeat, but an opportunity for God to work in us and through us in ways we never expected. Our mistakes, our regrets, our missed opportunities, none of these are beyond God's ability to restore. In fact, it is often in the brokenness that God's greatest work takes place. The same God who brought light out of darkness, who breathed life into the dust, is the one who can take the fragments of our lives and make them whole again. The question we must ask ourselves, however, is not whether God can restore the years we feel have been lost, but whether we are willing to trust Him in the process. It is easy to look at our past and wish for a different outcome, but wishing will not change the reality of what is past. What we have, what we can control, is our present and our future. And while we may not be able to undo the past, we can choose to move forward with a sense of faith and hope that God is working in the hidden places of our hearts, preparing us for something better. When we think of lost years, it's important to remember that God's timing is not bound by our limited understanding of time. We often want restoration to happen according to our schedule, but God's restoration comes in His time, not ours. The seasons of life, with their cycles of growth and dormancy, are all part of His plan. What we may perceive as a wasted season is, in fact, a season of preparation. It is in the waiting, the seemingly idle years, that God does His most profound work within us. We may not see it at the time, but every moment of loss and every season of waiting is a part of the tapestry that God is weaving in our lives. And though we may not understand the pattern right away, we can trust that it will all come together in the end. Furthermore, our understanding of what it means to lose time is often shaped by the world around us. which prizes efficiency and productivity above all else. We are told that success is measured by how much we accomplish, how much we produce, and how quickly we do it. But this view of time overlooks the more profound aspects of the human experience, those moments of quiet reflection, of emotional healing, of personal growth that cannot be quantified. God's restoration does not always follow the rules of this world. Sometimes He allows us to experience loss in order to teach us the deeper truths of life, such as patience, humility, and grace. These lessons, though they may seem difficult at the time, are often the ones that shape us the most. There is also the question of whether we are able to accept restoration when it comes. It is one thing to believe in the possibility of restoration, but it is another to receive it with open hands and an open heart. Sometimes we hold on to the pain of the past, believing that it is all we deserve or that we can never move beyond it. But the promise of restoration is that God can take even our darkest moments and use them for His glory and our good. The healing that comes with restoration is not always instantaneous, nor is it always easy, but it is always profound. As we begin to recognize that loss is not the end, but the beginning of something new, we start to see the possibility of redemption in every situation. The lost years, the broken dreams, the heart actors, they are not the end of our story. They are simply a chapter that will eventually give way to something more beautiful. Time, like all things in life, is not ours to control. But it is in the recognition of this truth that we open ourselves to the possibility of God's miraculous work in our lives. The lost years, in the end, are not lost at all. They are simply part of the journey that will lead us to a deeper understanding of who we are, who God is, and the incredible things He is able to do in our lives. Faith is not just an abstract concept, something to cling to in the quiet moments of contemplation, but a dynamic force that shapes the very fabric of our lives. When we face loss, whether of time, dreams, or opportunities, it is often our faith that becomes the bridge between despair and hope. We may feel overwhelmed by the weight of our losses, questioning if anything good can come from the wreckage. But it is in those moments of brokenness that faith proves its power to restore what seems irretrievably lost. Faith is the belief that no matter the circumstances, God can work in and through us to bring about a greater good, even from the most painful situations. It is easy to hold on to faith when everything is going well, when the world around us seems bright and our plans are unfolding as we hoped. But true faith is most evident in the face of adversity, when the path forward is obscured and the losses we've suffered seem insurmountable. It is in these moments that our faith is tested, stretched, and purified. Faith is not merely an emotional response to the good times, it is a steadfast trust in the goodness and sovereignty of God, even when the world feels like it's falling apart. When we lose something significant in life, whether it's a career, a relationship, or the dreams we once held, it's easy to fall into the trap of believing that our future is defined by that loss. The temptation is to look at our circumstances and see nothing but despair, thinking that the future is too dark to hold anything of value. But faith teaches us to see beyond the immediate pain and to trust that God is still in control. It invites us to believe that, despite what we may feel in the moment, there is a purpose even in the hardest of seasons. This faith doesn't dismiss the pain or the reality of our circumstances. It doesn't ask us to pretend that everything is fine when it's not. Instead, it acknowledges the reality of loss while simultaneously holding on to the truth that God can and will restore what has been taken. It's the understanding that our losses do not define us. They are part of a larger narrative that is still unfolding. God's restorative power doesn't always work according to our timetable or in the ways we expect, but it is always at work in both the seen and unseen. Sometimes we can't see the full picture in the moment, and that's where faith becomes crucial. It's the assurance that even when we don't have the answers or the solution, we can trust that God does. Faith allows us to walk forward, step by step, not knowing exactly what the future holds, but trusting that each step is part of the process of healing, restoration, and transformation. And transformation, it is a quiet confidence that God is never distant, even when the path is unclear. True faith in these moments calls us to release control, to let go of our need to dictate the outcome, and to trust that God's plans are far greater than our own. It requires a willingness to believe that what we have lost is not lost forever, and that, through His grace, we can experience a restoration beyond what we could have imagined. Faith is not about avoiding the hurt or denying the pain. It is about trusting that even in the midst of our brokenness, there is a deeper work happening, one that will ultimately lead to a future where our losses are redeemed and our dreams are restored. God's timing is often a concept that we wrestle with. We live in a world where everything is immediate, messages are instant, answers are fast, and progress seems to be measured by how quickly we can move from one task to another. This mindset can easily lead to frustration when God's response to our prayers or our needs doesn't come according to our timeline. When we feel that we've waited long enough, or when it seems that the years have passed without seeing the full fulfillment of our dreams, it can be difficult to reconcile the delay with the belief that God is indeed at work. We often find ourselves asking, why does it take so long? Or why doesn't God act faster? But the truth is, God's timing is not just different from ours, it is perfect in ways we cannot fully understand. The challenge, however, is learning to trust in that perfect timing, especially when it contradicts our own desires for immediate results. Our impatience, our sense of urgency, our longing for control can make waiting feel unbearable, and it can sometimes lead us to question whether God hears our prayers at all. We may look at the lost years, the seemingly unanswered requests, and feel that God has either forgotten us or chosen not to answer. But this is where faith is refined. It's in those moments of waiting when nothing seems to be happening that we are called to trust more deeply in God's greater plan for our lives. One of the most powerful truths we must learn is that God's delays are not denials. Just because we don't see immediate results doesn't mean that God is inactive. In fact, often it is during these periods of waiting that God is working in ways that we cannot perceive. The absence of visible progress doesn't mean that God has abandoned us. It might simply mean that He is preparing us for something greater. We are often too focused on the outcome, too eager to rush forward. But God is concerned not just with the destination, but with the journey specifically, with how we grow during the journey. The Bible is full of examples where God's timing seemed to defy human logic. Take, for example, the story of Abraham and Sarah. God promised them a child, yet for years there was no sign of that promise coming to fruition. They waited for decades, and in the interim they made mistakes and doubted, trying to take matters into their own hands. Yet, even in their impatience and frustration, God's promise came to pass in His perfect time. It wasn't until Sarah was well beyond childbearing age that God brought Isaac into the world, and through him the nation of Israel was born. Had God answered their prayers on their timetable, it would have been easy to assume that it was the result of their own strength or planning. But by waiting until it was humanly impossible, God showed that His promises are not bound by the limitations of time or our understanding. Similarly, consider the life of Joseph. Joseph was given dreams as a young man dreams of greatness and influence. Yet, instead of seeing those dreams realized in a swift, victorious rise to power, Joseph faced a frail, false accusations, and years of imprisonment. From the outside, it seemed as though his dreams were fading with each passing year. But in God's perfect timing, Joseph's dreams came to fruition. His time in prison, though painful, was not wasted. It was during those years that Joseph's character was refined, his leadership skills were honed, and his trust in God deepened. When the time finally came for Joseph to rise to power, it was not just a personal victory, but a divine appointment that would ultimately save not only Egypt, but also his family during a time of famine. Had God acted according to Joseph's desires, he would not have been prepared for the role he was called to fulfill. These examples remind us that God's timing is not bound by our expectations, and it is not a reflection of His love for us or the urgency of our need. His timing is, instead, a demonstration of His wisdom and His understanding of what is truly best for us. He sees the bigger picture, the details that we cannot yet comprehend. What we may perceive as delay may actually be God's protection or preparation, guiding us towards something far greater than we could have imagined. The challenge, then, is not to rush or to try to force God's hand, but to learn to rest in the assurance that His timing is always right. This is not a passive resignation to the circumstances, but an active trust in God's plan. It means learning to be content where we are, even while we hope and pray for change. It means choosing to believe that God is working, even when we cannot see it. It means finding peace in the waiting, knowing that God is not being our time. There is a deep and often overlooked beauty in the waiting. When we are forced to wait for something, it teaches us patience, perseverance, and the art of trust. We learn to detach ourselves from the need for immediate gratification and grow in the understanding that life is a process, not an event. It is in the waiting that we are often transformed. If everything happened according to our plan, we would miss the opportunity to grow in the ways that only come through waiting and trusting. Moreover, God's timing is not just about the when, but also the how. Sometimes we may think that the way things are unfolding is less than ideal. Perhaps we are waiting for a job opportunity, or for reconciliation in a relationship, or for a breakthrough in a dream we have been chasing for years. We may see delays, obstacles, or setbacks as signs of failure, but God often uses these very things to prepare us for the way in which He will answer our prayers. The process of waiting refines us, makes us more receptive to His guidance, and positions us in the right place at the right place at the right time. The waiting is part of the answer. It is not a detour, but a part of the journey. God's timing also allows us to understand that our dreams and desires are not always aligned with what He knows is best for us. We might long for something in the present, but God, in His wisdom, knows what we need for the future. Sometimes He waits because He wants to give us something better than what we originally asked for. This might not be immediately apparent, and it may require us to trust in God's goodness and sovereignty when the answers don't come quickly or in the form we expect. The ultimate key to trusting God's timing is rooted in the belief that He is good, and that He works all things together for our good. The waiting, the delays, the uncertainty, all are part of the divine orchestration that will ultimately lead to our restoration and fulfillment. Our human impatience is often rooted in a lack of trust in this truth. We want things now, and we think we know what is best, but God, with His infinite wisdom, is orchestrating everything with a love and care that we cannot fully grasp. Trusting His timing requires surrendering our desire for control and embracing the truth that He knows what He is doing. When we experience brokenness, whether in our hearts, our relationships, or our circumstances, it can often feel like an irreversible state, a condition from which we may never fully recover. The shards of our dreams, the pieces of our hopes, lie scattered around us, and we begin to wonder if they can ever be made whole again. The very nature of brokenness suggests a permanent flaw, a scar that remains forever, a wound that never quite heals. However, it is within this very brokenness that the potential for transformation is found. God has a unique way of working in the midst of our brokenness, and rather than leaving us in a state of despair, He uses it to shape us into something far more beautiful than we could have imagined. Brokenness, by its very definition, is a fracture, a tearing apart, but it also carries within it the possibility of something new emerging. We are often tempted to view our pain as something to be avoided or fixed immediately, but when we embrace the truth that brokenness can lead to transformation, we begin to see it differently. In God's hands, what seems to be a shattered mess is in fact the raw material for a greater work. The Bible offers numerous examples of individuals who experienced deep brokenness, but were ultimately transformed through it. The Apostle Paul, for instance, endured immense suffering throughout his life. He was beaten, imprisoned, and eventually killed for his faith. Yet, through his brokenness, he became a powerful instrument in God's hands, spreading the message of Christ and encouraging others to find strength in their weaknesses. Similarly, in the Old Testament, the story of Job illustrates how deep suffering can lead to spiritual refinement and a deeper relationship with God. Job was a man who lost everything: his wealth, his health, and his family. He endured physical pain, emotional anguish, and spiritual questioning. Yet, in the midst of his brokenness, he came to a profound understanding of God's sovereignty. His faith was not only restored but strengthened, and his story serves as a testimony to all who face hardship. Through his experience, Job learned that brokenness does not mark the end of hope, but opens the door to a deeper, more intimate relationship with the Creator. We often resist the idea that our brokenness can lead to anything positive, and understandably so. The pain of loss, the ache of disappointment, and the weight of failure are not easy to bear, yet it is precisely in these moments that God does His deepest work. Just as a potter molds and shapes clay by pressing and kneading it, so too does God use our brokenness to shape our character and our future. Through suffering, we are refined. Our selfishness is stripped away, our heart softened, and our dependency on God grows stronger. The brokenness forces us to surrender, to acknowledge that we are not in control, and that it is only through God's grace that we can endure. Moreover, when we allow God to work in our brokenness, He not only restores us, but transforms us into something more beautiful and resilient than we were before. What was once a crack or a wound becomes part of the story of who we are, an integral part of our testimony. Our scars become symbols of God's healing power, reminders that we were once broken but are now made whole. We begin to see that brokenness does not define us, rather, it becomes the canvas on which God paints his masterpiece. The transformation is not about erasing the past, but about using the past to create something entirely new.